Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video we're going to do a audio commentary of a 23 Halls of Atonement we did last Fortified week on Spiteful Volcanic. This was a run that I haven't watched since we did it. It's been a few days, but I remember this being a cool run and I remember wanting to review this for YouTube. So we downloaded it and are. This is a key that I've been kind of thinking about a lot and trying to get better at, healing some of the shard pulls specifically. So we'll see how I did and if there's anything I can improve on. So before we start, I'll talk about my setup a little bit. I'm running Earthgrab Totem in this key for Spiteful. I think one of my other keys I did a commentary of was Spiteful as well. Although Spiteful can be pretty obnoxious for melee, it's something that if you do well, it doesn't slow you down too much. So you'll see lots of pushing done on Spiteful. I'm running Merilith for this key because we have two potencies now on Merilith as a Resto Shaman, but I will be switching back to Emony for the next Fortified week because now the second potency is unlocked for Emony. Other than that, nothing too crazy. I am using pretty standard stuff. I have the Kabbalist Hymnal and Changeling Trinket, and for the most part, pretty regular talents. Pretty happy with my gear and my shaman so far. I've been sort of trying to figure out exactly what sort of stat breakdown and like setup overall I want for my guy. I'm thinking of making a video, maybe an advanced shaman guide, if you will, where I talk more about what you want specifically for high keys and some of the testing about the different legendaries and items I've been using. So if that interests you, let me know. I kind of want to do some for other classes too, but at the same time I just don't think I feel like I have enough experience on anything other than shaman. So hopefully we get this key started soon. One thing I don't talk a lot about is consumables, but during a push week like this when we're playing for score, I'm slamming everything I got. You can see my augment rune, flask, all that stuff. I would recommend you do the same if gold is available to you, but it is not for everybody. So you'll notice we don't move at the start. There's a sort of RP mob that walks forward and activates itself when you move. However, if you stand still at the start of the dungeon, it makes it slightly easier for the tank to pull stuff. So you'll see right here, as we walk in, these two mobs are running in. As soon as you move, they'll start running in, even if you do it during the shield thing. So you'll notice we wait. That way it makes it easier for the tank to group up. In a pug, you can almost never get your team to stand still, but it's something to note if you're playing with an organized group. So this first pull is a little bit rough. You'll see one thing I'm not doing is tagging a lot of the mobs or healing. This is because I don't know exactly what my tank has threat on. Sorry, hold on, let me... Excuse me, okay. You'll notice I flame shocked this one guy because I saw my tank hit it and applied Fiery Brand to it, but otherwise I'm being careful with what I heal. A pull like this where your tank is pulling multiple packs at the same time, you want to do everything that you can to help them group it together. And one thing as a healer that you can do is pre-hot them with Riptide and Earth Shield and then don't touch anything until they get them gathered up. So you'll see I'm moving forward. I'm also putting the Obliterator on focus targets. So far my coaching videos and my commentary videos I've talked about focus targets, but this is a dungeon where there's almost always one caster mob and you get a ton of use out of focus targets. So this one pack right here, I decided to SLT very early. I like doing it to help out the tank get threat and not have to worry so much about expending his cheat, and he can focus on helping the DPS do damage. This first pull, we have tons of cooldowns. You can see our Boomy convoking, our mage is combusting, everyone's doing a ton of damage, and I want to help enable the tank as much as I can, keep all the mobs together to get good use out of our cooldowns. As the Spitefuls start to spawn, I use my Earthgrab Totem. One thing you can do here as well is use Earthbind and Earthgrab. Throughout the dungeon, I'm constantly using those two totems to help keep the mobs grouped up. I run in and fleshcraft there a little bit greedily to get my buffs, although that's not something you'll have to worry about anymore. So here I do almost the same thing as I did before. I focus target the Obliterator. This pull I choose to use Ascendance instead of SLT. One common theme that you'll see with shamans is you should just be slamming your cooldowns over and over. In a recent coaching video I did, I talked about how the shaman wasn't using enough cooldowns, and you can see how I'm super proactive with using my cooldowns on every single pull. I get a little bit unlucky here. I get some volcanic spawning under me while I don't have my Spirit Walker's Grace up quite yet, so I sort of have to interrupt some casts. Psycho ends up proccing his cheat death there, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, these first two pulls are really tough, and sometimes you just end up proccing cheat. So here the mobs are starting to... The Psycho has to run away from the mobs, and the mobs are chasing him. So this is where I'm using my totems to try and control them and keep them grouped up. I want to not only keep the mobs grouped up, but I also want to keep the Spiteful away so that people don't have to run away too much. So you can see I'm cycling there. First I use Earth Bind, then I use Earth Grab, and then as they're running out of that, I use my Cap Totem to just stun them. Again, a theme of this dungeon, because the tank is going to have to be kiting so much, I want to constantly be slowing the mobs, stunning the mobs, keeping them together so that our DPS can blow them up. One thing that Dorky talked about in a video about Mythic Plus groups and organization is that a lot of people look at these DPS meters and they're like, man, how does Chow do so much damage? How does Hippo do so much damage? How does Junkrat do so much damage? And a lot of it comes from the group as a whole pulling big and then keeping the pull together so that they can do damage. So here Psycho died. Let's rewind a little bit and see what happened exactly. So this is he gets his Feldev back up, so he has a few seconds of meta and he comes in. This pull can be very dangerous, especially if Loyal Beast comes up, so you have to be careful here. Yeah, that was unfortunate. So in these pulls on a really high fortified key, you basically can't be tanking these mobs without meta. And here Psycho dies. I see the shoot from the Houndmaster being targeted on Chow, and I decide that Psycho should be okay, and I decide to priority Chow instead because he's getting hit with the archer, and if he got hit a couple times, he would be in danger. However, Psycho ends up getting killed. Unfortunate, but as a healer on these sorts of pulls, you'll have to come to terms with the fact that you can't always keep your team alive, or your tank specifically. The tank's life is in his own hands. So one thing we won't talk much about this dungeon is healing High Prideful. This is because we're using the Stoneborns to kill the Prideful quickly. It's really tempting to pull these Stoneborns and mind control them with the Venthyr ability and use them on the big packs, but they don't actually do that much AoE damage. The best use of the Stoneborn is to pull them on single target because they're basically just a mob that melees. My standard Prideful rotation, I'm putting Riptide on everyone. As I start to fall behind, I'm going to use my Primordial Wave. This key, I'm using Tumbling Waves, the conduit that has a chance to reset my Primordial Wave. You'll see in some other keys this week, I've been trying out Heavy Rainfall too. I don't feel super strongly about the second Potency conduit. I think you can get a lot of value from either of them. So these are probably the most, I don't want to say dangerous, but it takes a lot of finesse to get these pulls right. So these are the Shard of Hulkias. They pulse AoE damage at what looks like maybe like a 38-yard range. So what you can do is outrange them. However, as a shaman, it can be difficult to outrange them because number one, you still need to be healing your melee, which might not always be in range of you. Just because the shard is in range doesn't mean the melee are if they're standing on the other side. Another thing is that your interrupt is not 40 yards. You have to come into the shard to interrupt. So what I do as a shaman here is I try and bounce between sometimes I'll stand in, sometimes I don't. One thing that you'll have to do when you get into higher keys is you'll just have to stop healing the ranged. The ranged players will have to learn that they have to stand outside of the shard and DPS from afar. And you have to prioritize yourself and the melee and the interrupts. Healing the ranged players come last because they can always step outside. I'm not saying completely abandon your ranged players in like a 12 key, but as you're starting to go higher and higher and your melee DPS need a lot of healing, you just sort of need to trust your ranged DPS will keep their lives in their own hands. So you'll see that I walk away from the first shard, the Thrash, if you will, and then on this one it looks like I'm probably going to pop some sort of cooldown to live. I have a really big Cloudburst here. I would like to see myself pop Ascendance or SLT or something. Oh, okay, so I pop my Mana Tide, which is sort of like a mini cooldown, and then I'm gonna decide to spam Chain Heal here. It looks like I was a little bit slow with that, and I also have to use SLT. This is not really a situation that I want to be using SLT, but I decide to use both. Ideally, I'm using only one, and I pop Ascendance. This looks like not very well planned. Let's sort of go back and watch exactly what happened. It looks like all of our ranged DPS are standing inside of the shard, and I sort of fall behind here. Another mistake I make is I dispel the curse off of Chow. Again, this is specific to high keys. I'm not saying do this in lower keys, but there are two different things you have to dispel in this pull. There are magic debuffs, the Siphon Life, and the curses. You don't have enough dispels to get both of them, and the Siphon Lifes no one else can dispel. They do a lot of damage, so as a healer you have to use all of your dispels on those Siphon Lifes. And this cast right here, you'll see that it happens to work out that I can still dispel the Siphon Life off Chow, but you can see how much damage that does. You'll notice again, I have the Collector on focus. I'm trying to kick the Collect Sins. It does a lot of tank damage, and it also spawns some ads. Yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack here with the shard pull. Maybe after a couple more we can, you know, I've already mentioned like 17 different things with this pull, but there's just a lot to think about here. So I'm trying not to heal the ranged, but sometimes you have to. I'm trying to mostly focus on the melee and getting the interrupts, dispelling the Siphon Life, keeping my team alive. I commit very heavily to cooldowns there. I use my SLT, Ascendance, and Mana Tide. This pull is going to be really tough for me. The route that we've been doing lately has been, I would call this a safer route. Instead of pulling the two obliterators with the shard and the collector, we pull these four. It ends up being slightly slower, but it allows us to not have to lust this pull, and it ends up making this pull just a little bit safer. It gives us a little break for cooldowns. You can see that it looks like Chow is combusting, but other than that, no one really has any sort of big cooldowns to use. Or maybe Hippo Convoked, I don't know, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Again, I'm focusing the Obliterator. Here I can see that Psycho's running out of meta, but he wants to keep these mobs together, so I'm just going to be spamming heals on him. As a healer, sometimes you just have to do this. If your tank is trying to keep the mobs together and he doesn't have anything big up, you just have to commit to using Healing Surge over and over. As a shaman, you want to be still cycling your other spells while you're using your Healing Surge. You don't want to get stuck spamming Surge over and over. That's because your Surge will lose value if you're not casting Riptide to get the Tidal Wave charges, if you're not keeping your Earth Shield applied, and then obviously you still want to be using your kick, using totems and stuff. Again, you can see my totems here on the right side of my little Weakora HUD UI. I'm using my Earth Grab like every single pull that the mobs die in the Spiteful spawn. If I can use one global to save two globals, or even one global for my DPS, it's definitely worth it. So going into the shard pull, the first one I decide to Astral Shift just so that I can stay in the shard and not have to worry about myself. Our mage alter times because he wants to combust. It's important to track alter time from your mage friend here, because you shouldn't be wasting heals into alter time. It sort of depends on the situation. Sometimes you still want to if there's nothing else going on, but so you'll watch what happens is, if you're not familiar with the way alter time works, it saves their current health, and then whenever they want, they can disable the alter time or go back, and then it goes back to the health that they have. So he alter timed at high health here, so I don't really need to heal him that much because he can always go back to full health at any time during that thrash. However, no one else was taking that much damage, so I did throw a heal into him anyway because he was getting owned. So now the second thrash is coming out. I'd like to see myself outrange this. You can see that all of the range players here are walking out, and I'm focusing my healing on the rogue because the rogue has to stay in, and also Junkrat can use evasion, I believe, to stop that, but he may not want to. So you can see my idea with the way these shards work. On the very first thrash, I try and pop a big cooldown so that I can stay in. Then on the second thrash, I'll maybe just run away and outrange it now that the pull's sort of settled. Here, I use my Mana Tide Totem to sort of catch up. Chow ends up dying. It looks like he was just barely in range of that thrash, which is unfortunate, but sometimes it happens. It's not too bad because he wasn't in the middle of combust or anything, and we were very close to the respawn point. And you can see what we're doing now. We're just trying to outrange the thrash. This pull gets very spicy. This is one of the downsides of this pull, is that this pride comes in very early, like as soon as 1 or 2 mobs die. So this I remember this run not being great for us. So I throw down okay, it looks like I didn't throw down a totem, but I would have liked to see myself throw down a totem there. I need to keep these mobs grouped together because these mobs need to die very quickly. Hippo uses Typhoon just to try and keep Psycho alive because he didn't have any meta or anything. Because this pull's been going on a really long time and I'm starting to run out of mana, I asked for Innervate. As a shaman, you don't need mana too much, but when we're talking about really, really difficult prides, then, hey, you know, you got to do what you got to do. I decided to pop Ascendance here fairly early. When you're popping Ascendance during Pride, you want to do it like, you don't really want to be greedy with it because Ascendance lasts for 15 seconds, which is a really long time. So you don't want to wait for the Pride to be like completely owning you before you pop your Ascendance. Just popping it at 40% health from it is totally reasonable. You also want to make sure that your Cloudburst is up because your Cloudburst will store that Ascendance burst healing in there. I have a Primordial Wave charge with my Ascendance, so I can almost immediately top my team during it. The Pride is still alive, and my team lets me know that they don't have big cooldowns, so I decide to pop SLT again. Luckily, all of those big cooldowns that I used for that shard are up for this Pride, and I think that was part of my thinking when I was just slamming all my cooldowns on on the very first shard, was that I may as well just use them now because I'm gonna need them for this Pride. That was the only Pride I think that besides the last one, that we don't have a Stoneborn for, so that was one that I sort of planned to need to have big cooldowns anyway. So I see now why I blew so many cooldowns on that first shard, because I was going to need to use it anyway. One thing you can do, I didn't have Spirit Walkers there, but if you're hard casting an ability, you can just use Spirit Walkers. Even if you don't want to move from the volcano, you can still use Spirit Walkers, and it lets you cast while you're getting knocked up, which is handy. I have the Obliterator on focus target, trying to kick him when I can. Generally, there's only 1 caster mob per pull. It might look a little bit reckless how big we're pulling this dungeon. However, it's actually pretty calculated in that we want to make sure there's only 1 caster mob. That way there's not a overwhelming number of interrupts. Psycho actually cheats there again. We've been trying to be organized and try and just really force damage, and it's tough as a tank to stay in, but when you have a cheat available, sometimes you just have to risk it and stay in. That way you can help your DPS do damage. Again, you can see Hippo and Chow doing over 25k DPS. So although it was unfortunate that we lost that cheat, we don't have any super difficult pulls, so having the, you know, it's actually really good how Psycho is constantly using that cheat to keep the mobs grouped together just for the extra meta uptime. It might not seem good, but when you see how close the timer gets on this dungeon, some of these cheats, if he was playing more timid, we maybe wouldn't have even timed the key. Although the Emini Soulbind is generally better, the Merilith Fleshcraft bonuses, whatever you want to call it, I don't know what it's called, like the solvency or whatever, is actually really strong for this dungeon. That's because there are both humanoids and beasts in like every single pull, so you get 2% mastery and 2% intellect with like close to 100% uptime. I think this may be a dungeon where I would even consider running Merilith over Emini on purpose. I would have to sort of think more deeply about it and math it out. So I'm using my totems again to try and keep the mobs grouped. My Earth Grab is almost coming back up. We'll see. Hopefully I use it here. This Pride, we're going to have a Stoneborn on. we're trying to move as little as possible while still, you know, not standing in the mobs. Luckily, we have the Stoneborn for this one. That's why we were being a little bit reckless and okay with pulling so big, even though we had a Pride coming up soon. In a Pug, I would probably be a bit more careful with the way that you're pulling this stuff, but time can be an issue here, especially when we have so many deaths. So, yeah, that was very unfortunate. Let's rewind a little bit and watch exactly what happened here. So Psycho's getting hit. Looking at the cooldown situation here, Psycho is in very, very big danger. He has no meta available, no demon spikes, no cheat, no fiery brand, and his Fel Dev is almost up, but even Fel Dev is only going to give him a short window. So in hindsight, like, this was a very scary moment for me, but in hindsight, watching it back, Psycho is a very, very high priority on this pull. An important thing as a healer is to constantly be looking at who's in danger and who's not. And you can see that Junkrat has Cloak, I have Astral Shift, Hippo has his defensive, Chow has Alter Time, Block, and Cauterize. Psycho is in very big danger here, and I should very much be prioritizing Psycho with my heals. And we also still have a lot of mobs in here. These Groundkeepers hit really hard. So now is the situation where Psycho is in very big danger. His Fel Dev is running out, and he's going to have basically nothing to stay alive. My Earth Shield runs out. This is where I was a little bit... It's hard in the moment to understand and, like, do everything, but unfortunately a Spiteful spawns on one of these Groundskeepers, and I feel the need to run away. I don't have Spirit Walkers, so I can't be casting while I'm moving here, and Psycho is going to get hit really hard. I pop Ascendance, but the unfortunate thing is I'm separated from my tank from this because of this Spiteful, and Ascendance's range is only 20 yards, so even though I pop Ascendance, I was basically the only one that got healed by this, and it didn't help any of my allies, and Psycho ends up going down because he just doesn't have anything alive. This pull's been going on for a long time. This was quite unfortunate. I'm not sure if there's anything I could have done. That Spiteful spawn was very unfortunate. In mega hindsight, if I would have been walking towards Psycho so that when the Spiteful spawned, I was on the same side of the boss as him, or the Pride or whatever, that would have been better. But that's something that's just so hard to think of in the moment and recognize that danger. Luckily, we have a Stoneborn for the Pride, so as soon as Psycho goes down, he lived just barely long enough to get all the Groundskeepers dead, and we were able to finish the pull. This is Halls is really funny because it's a very fun dungeon for DPS. The pulls are really big, and there's a lot of stuff going on. However, this is a very, very stressful dungeon for a tank. There's a sort of a meme or whatever going around about the kiting meta, if you will, and I don't think it's true necessarily for every dungeon, but this is a dungeon where the pulls are so dangerous for a tank. Here, let's look at this moment, because this was not very great from me. So we go into this shard. I have no defensives up except for SLT. I maybe would have liked to see myself just run in an SLT for Psycho here, because I guess he does have meta, but I generally like to use a cooldown at the beginning of the shard to sort of stabilize while, you know, instead of trying to outrange it. Unfortunately, I got hit by a volcano or something. This is like a little bit sloppy by me. I'm trying to outrange, but I'm not able to. This is a very big mistake for me as well. I'm prioritizing Chow with my healing because he's getting hit really hard. But as I mentioned earlier in the video, you just sort of have to trust ranged players with, you know what I mean, like backing up and staying out of range. If Chow's gonna die here, he's gonna die. Also, he isn't gonna die because he has Cauterize. Psycho wasn't meta, but I need to be healing Junkrat here. I need to be prioritizing Junkrat and Psycho. Junkrat gets really, really low. He yeah, so he cheats there. That was 100% my fault that he cheated, because I was prioritizing our mage, who was totally fine, versus Junkrat, who was not. And then I sort of realized that I probably should have used SLT here. I also commit my Manatide Totem just to help catch up, because I was a little bit overwhelmed. Again, Chow, I don't know if it's like a weird line of sight issue here, but Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going on. It seems like I'm having some trouble outranging the shard too, and now Spitefuls are spawning. I'm using my Earth Grab Totem again to try and keep the Spitefuls back. This pull is going so badly for us. I don't know if it has to do with the Z-axis or why, but we're all struggling a lot with outranging the shard. I'm doing a little bit better this time, making sure I'm prioritizing Junkrat. I sort of recognized, I think, in that time that he had cheated, and also he doesn't have evasion up or anything, so I need to pump him with heals. Once all the other mobs die, the tank doesn't even get hit that hard from the shard, so it's mainly Junkrat that's in danger. At this point, with all the pulls that have gone so poorly, we definitely feel like we're behind. We could still time this key, but it's very, very tight. I throw it on my cap totem there right away. I should have waited a little bit, I think, for this beam. Generally, though, whenever I see mobs grouped together and my tank isn't in meta, I just like to throw down that cap totem anyway, but it maybe was a little bit early. You can see, again, I'm using my totems here to keep the mobs grouped. That's like a very important theme of this dungeon, is tank goes in, tank gets threat, tank does some damage, then tank needs to run away. Use your totems to keep the mobs grouped. Use your interrupts to keep the caster in. I get a very unfortunate Spiteful spawn. This is an area you have to be really careful. There's lots of stuff on the side that you can pull. You can see there's the Stoneborn here, which we don't quite want yet. There's this 2-pack over here. Especially in pugs where you're running, you may not know the route. You have to be very, very careful with which way you walk here, because not only is there so much stuff that you can pull, but there's also the dark blades that have the frontal. So this can be a very dangerous area for accidentally face pulling a mob or doing something tragic that wipes the key. So we pull the Stoneborn into Hulkias. As I mentioned earlier, you always want to have the Stoneborn on single target. It's great to pull with Prideful. It's great to pull with bosses. So that's what we're doing. There's a lot of Stoneborns in this area that we can pull with Hulkias. I believe we pulled 2 different ones. And the 3rd Stoneborn we pulled on that Pride earlier. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to bait these swirlies in the back of the room, or whatever you want to call that area. The swirlies alternate between one on the tank, and then one on range, and then one on the tank, and then it goes back and forth. So I'm trying to stay on the outside of the circle to bait the ones on ranged, and then you can see that after a few of them have gone out, our tank drags the boss out of that area. That way we have more room to move around. That was an excellent job that Psycho did there, tanking this boss. We managed almost the full area of this circle is clean. You can see that now we're starting to run out of room a little bit, but at the same time, we still have enough to move around. I'm still doing my best to bait some of the circles on the outside. I maybe shouldn't be baiting on top of my mage there. You can see I sort of realized that I probably shouldn't be standing outside of or on top of my mage's rune of power. Once there's about to be this refracted Sinlight, I try and give myself a lot of space. You can see I sort of rotate to the other side of the boss. That way, no matter which... I realize that this area is sort of dangerous that I'm standing right now, and I wanted to get out. This is an area that can be tough with pugs. If you... This whole dungeon, or this whole first part, is very tank dependent. And sometimes you just have to do your best as a healer and control what you can control. So we shroud by this area. This area specifically is really, really nasty. This is the hardest trash in the dungeon by far, if the other stuff wasn't hard enough. There's lots of casters, so we decided to skip all of this. You need 80% count to go into to have enough count by the end of the dungeon. So as long as you spawn the 4th Pride by the 2nd boss, you're good. Chow has a technical error with his shroud. But, you know, everything else in this run was going poorly, so we're just like... At this point, we were a little bit demoralized, I think. Previously, I talked about some healing errors that I was making. At this point in the dungeon and going forward, you'll definitely notice some healing errors I'm making. I'm leaning more heavily towards dealing damage at this point in the run. As a healer, I try and do everything I can to keep the run going smoothly. But eventually you reach sort of a point where you realize that, okay, this is going to be very tight on the timer and every second is going to count. And I might start making some more aggressive decisions with how much I'm healing, just trying to deal more damage. Especially on a pull like this where the tank isn't getting hit too hard and he has his cheat. Hippo goes and sneaks one of the Stoneborns. This one, you have to be very careful when you pull this. We've pulled other mobs with this before. I wouldn't recommend trying this at home unless you go into Mythic 0 and practice it to know how to pull this one. But we pull this with the Pride. This is great on a 23 because 23 Prides are very scary. But this is a situation where, as a healer, this Pride can actually be really, really tough if you don't have a Stoneborn, because your team is trying to save their cooldowns for the boss. Usually with a Pug, you'll have Lust for this boss, but in this situation, we lob Lust somewhere else. Anyway, this is a Pride that can be very scary, and you should be ready to commit cooldowns for it because it's going to take a long time to die. Luckily, we have the Stoneborn to kill it, but something to keep in mind in Pugs. If you're ever doing a Pride right before a somewhat difficult boss, always expect as a healer to have to expend some cooldowns on that Pride. Don't try and hold everything for the boss. It's almost better that you use your cooldowns on the Pride. That way your team can use their cooldowns on the boss and it can die faster. You generally don't need big healing cooldowns during Pride on a boss. You can just sort of heal through stuff without it. When these ads spawn, I try not to do anything that would get threat of them. I feel like if you don't have threat of the mobs, they just sort of run in like that. So I don't heal anybody, and I also don't hit any of the mobs until they get gathered up. This curse you need to dispel on the target who gets jumped on. Generally, I assume that if like a mage or a druid is just going to decurse themselves. So if the jump is on Psycho or Junkrat, I'm going to dispel them. And if it's not, I'm usually just going to dispel Junkrat just because he's dealing the most damage. You could dispel yourself if you feel like you're in danger. You can also dispel the tank if you feel like the tank is in danger. We have a little bit of a technical difficulty here where we don't stomp the ads. I don't remember exactly what happened, but we have many ads, and at this point I basically decided that the key's over. Here I pop everything. This is what's cool about the Manatide legendary, is that you can pop Manatide with Ascendance and you can just do infinite healing, spamming chain heal during Ascendance. So somehow by some miracle we end up living this with... Using the Stoneborn is what saved us here, what allowed us to have this mistake, because otherwise I would have had to use my Ascendance or my Manatide on that Pride for sure. But because we were able to kill that Pride without cooldowns, we somehow lived. That was a very scary situation, but we made it through. Unfortunately, though, we had to commit a lot of defensives and nuked all in the ads, so the boss is taking a little longer than we'd like. Even though it is fortified, once you get up to these really high keys, these bosses are going to take a long time, 2 or even more minutes. I decided to decurse Psycho here because Chow and Hippo are dispelling themselves, and Junkrat used Cloak, so I just dispelled Psycho. That way, because he's going to be dealing more damage than me. It's also a little bit of a safety thing as well. Once the boss gets low, like this low, you can just sort of ignore the ads and ignore any of the mechanics. Don't overcommit or worry too much about doing anything when you know that you can kill the boss within 10 seconds. Sometimes it's hard as a healer to pay attention. We have less than 10 minutes to do the rest of the dungeon. We're basically committed to playing very aggressively. But hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. This is a very, very dangerous pull again. As a tank, you have to be very careful here. As a healer, you should basically just expect your tank to die. Pretty much every time I pug this dungeon, the tank just dies if they're not used to taking this on a high key. I'll talk a little bit about these mobs since I didn't really talk about them too much, and you know, there's some important stuff to know about these mobs. So the Gargans, the dogs, they have a bleed that stacks up, and the bleed does a lot of damage. So you have to be careful making sure you're tracking those bleed stacks on your tank. As a Kyrian tank, you can use your potion to dispel it if you have too many stacks, which is very, very nice. The Houndsmasters shoot random targets. I have a weak aura here. You can see that tracks who they're shooting, which makes it easier for me to realize when my teammates are in danger or when they're not. When the Houndmasters get below 50% health, they use a cast called Loyal Beasts. The cast makes the bears do insane amounts of damage. It's also not a interruptible cast, so you have to use a stun for it. Junkrat is basically owning and completely stopping all of those casts, but in a pug, if you have any sorts of stun or anything you can use on that Loyal Beast cast, you should, especially if you feel like your tank isn't comfortable kiting. So we do what I would describe as a somewhat risky pull. We're pulling these 4 guys in with the boss and with the Stoneborn and taking it. This is a very dangerous situation, so I'm just popping all my cooldowns immediately. Again, a theme here is that I'm popping my cooldowns. I'm not waiting for my team to be in danger or like, oh, let me see with the health bars. Especially with a spell like Ascendance that lasts 15 seconds, I'm just throwing it down. Psycho here is in really big danger. Well, I don't know if I noticed it in the moment, but Psycho has, again, nothing, and he has nothing for a very long time. So even though I'm playing very aggressively here and I'm trying to, like, DPS the ads down, this is a situation where you probably should be spam healing your tank. And I have the Collector on focus again. I'm kicking that Collect Sins cast. As a Shaman, you can almost kick every single one. Not quite every single one, but, like... It channels for maybe like a second before you can kick it, but as a Shaman, I like having the Collector on focus and trying to kick all those Collect Sins casts. Luckily, we have Bloodlust for that pull. We have enough damage that we were able to kill those ads. That was sort of our ace up the sleeve, if you will. It looked like we were very behind on time, but we knew we had lust for this. This was our 3rd lust of the dungeon, and we lusted earlier in maybe suboptimal spots so that we could lust this pull and do this. You'll notice I let Chow dip very low, and I'm playing pretty aggressively there because of that alter time. Also, again, I'm watching this cauterize, and I'm sort of recognizing that, okay, we need to do a lot of damage, and I need to sort of let my tank run wild. So this is a situation where I get myself into. You almost can't drink in between this. Like, you almost can't drink for the rest of the dungeon until the next pride. This can be a bit scary as a healer because you can't... You'll see what happens here. You have to be very vigilant with your drink. So you'll watch what I'm doing here. So I'm DPSing the boss, and I'm going to stand near this portal. I'm going to try and get into the room as fast as I can and then sit down and drink, I hope. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. Yeah. So I'm standing right next to the portal. I'm rushing through, and then immediately I'm pressing my drink button. As soon as you start pulling this stuff, it global combats everybody, and you can't get a drink off. I knew that my mana was low, so the only chance I had to get mana is to run into the room myself to activate it and hurry up and get my drink off before I got put in combat. For whatever reason, the drink animations have been really weird. They broke the drink animations, but I got to 80% and I realized that was good. Again, I'm looking at the timer and I'm seeing that things we're in danger here. We're in high risk of dying, so I gotta get up. No time for food breaks. This is a part of the dungeon that can also be very dangerous. Pretty much every pull that we've done, I'm just like, this is a really dangerous pull. You have to watch these. So the manifestations of envy focus on random people and hit them. If you're nuking down the yellows really quickly, there's lots of these manifestations that spawn. And if they happen to target certain players a lot, they can do a lot of damage. Also, these pools on the ground, these red circles, sometimes they can be hard to see because there's so much going on. Also because your monkey DPS players are like salivating at how many targets there are and they're not actually looking at their screen or their health bar. So you have to be careful with these pools. Even just 1 or 2 ticks of these puddles can hurt. I'm getting railed by these manifestations. I use my goblin jump to try and get far away from them, but for some reason they move at the speed of light. So I'm running. We realize at this point that we may have to do pride with the boss, or at least do half and half. So although I would recommend generally to use a cooldown at some point because we're taking so much damage, I'm trying to save every cooldown that I have just to be able to use it with the Pride in case we have to pull the Pride with the boss. Luckily, we managed to get all of the manifestations down. Uncapped AoE. Junkrat putting up respectable numbers though. Poor rogues, man. We have 3.5 minutes, so it's gonna be very, very, very tight. And we're discussing now what we need to do to time this key, whether or not we need to pull the Pride with the boss or whatever. One thing you'll notice from higher end groups, maybe not all groups, but at least with us, is we're willing to take really big risks if we feel like we need to on time. And in this sort of uncharted territory of like doing the highest keys, you sort of don't even really know what you need. So to talk about prideful rotation, because this is the only like really hard pride that we have to do here, I'm keeping Riptide on everybody. I'm trying to keep Healing Rain on the ground. I'm trying to keep my Cloudburst rolling at all times. When I have time, I'm going to use Flame Shock on the Pride and also use my Lava Burst procs when I can. Here, whenever you get the orbs, you should always stand still. That way you can give your DPS time to move around. We decided that we were going to pull it into the boss, so I'm holding my SLT in Ascendance for a very long time. I think I probably should have used my Ascendance at some point here. The Pride is at 9% health or whatever, so I think I held on to my Ascendance a little bit too long, but this is why I used my SLT. Like, as I'm running in, I should use my Cloudburst, and then I should pop Ascendance. There's the Cloudburst, there's the Ascendance. It was just a little bit... Oh, no! That actually would have hurt us very badly there if I didn't get that SLT in time. But I sort of had the idea that I was going to need to use SLT and Ascendance and stuff to get everyone topped up as we move that Pride in. There's not really a special rotation that you have to do during Ascendance. You're basically just using the same spells that you would otherwise normally use. Notice I don't use Chain Heal very much unless I have my Mana Tide Lego up. Chain Heal just isn't super efficient, especially considering that you can't always pick who it's going on. It's slightly more efficient than using Healing Surge and Riptide if you're getting full value on it, but if any of that healing bounces to someone who doesn't really need the healing, whether it's like a mage with Alter Time or your tank who doesn't need it or whatever, then Chain Heal becomes worse. It's close enough that it's usually not worth using, but you can throw them in here or there if you don't have other buttons. So one thing that gets asked a lot in this, when we fight this boss, you can actually soak 2 of these statues at once. I don't know if everyone's nervous or what's going on here, but for some reason, one of them, I think maybe Psycho, or it was either Psycho or Junkrat, isn't soaking, and so Hippo's having to soak. These things do a lot of damage, and I'm also realizing that timer is very, very tight, so I'm trying not to heal, but at the same time, I have to spam heal. Generally, the tank will be okay from soaking the 2 of the pillars, so usually it's just me spamming healing on the rogue or whoever else is in range. I don't have any cooldowns because I had to use my SLT, Ascendance, all that stuff on the Pride. Generally, I'll have a cooldown that I can use during those soaks, but since things are so tight. So at this point, I've just completely given up healing Psycho. Timer's that tight that we need to do almost 1.5 million damage in only 1 minute. Psycho has cheat, and he also has his cheat trinket. I actually am purposely not healing him because number 1, I don't want to waste the globals healing our tank if he doesn't need it, and number 2, he actually wants to cheat and proc his meta, so I'm actually not healing him on purpose just so he can proc his meta so we have, like, you know, more damage overall on the boss. He also has his cheat trinket, so I'm still just completely abandoning healing our tank at this point. This is, like, again, something that you don't run into this situation too often where every second is going to count, but it's cool when it does. Junkrat has Cloak here, so I immediately just stop healing him. I tried to top him a little bit, though, because I wasn't sure if he was going to get it off in time. He also didn't have his cheat, so him dying there would have been tragic. I believe I have to resume healing Psycho at some point. That was his trinket sheet there. I don't know if there's a way I can be tracking that trinket sheet, but either way, that was his cheat that he had, so now I actually have to heal him a little bit. Timer is very tight, but spoiler, we time the key. I had my healing tide available. Maybe I should have used it at some point. I don't know why I held on to it or what I used it for, but it's not a super important button. Hippo pulling out the 9.8k overall. We were pretty happy with the ski. This was our first 23. I let Psycho die. Your tank will. This always happens. Your tank gets the bleed and it goes up a lot, and he can't hit anything, and he just dies. So generally, I'm paying attention. I'm healing the tank, but at that point, we were a little bit preoccupied. So out of this, we actually got a miss 24, which, spoiler, we depleted. But hey, we tried. So that covers my commentary of 23 hauls. I thought this would be a good key to cover, and it was, but it felt very loaded. It felt like I was just talking about random stuff nonstop, but I hope you found some things in this key useful, or something at least that I said. So either way, if you appreciated the video and you're looking forward to more commentaries, feel free to subscribe to my channel and drop the video a like, comment, and subscribe, and all that stuff. I'll be doing probably mostly Resto Shaman commentaries, but I may be doing some from other healers too. I do want to cover other healers and talking about like how to heal high keys or some advice. However, I don't quite have the gear experience on those guys yet. So anyway, thanks again for watching. Hope everyone has a good weekend, and happy keying, friends.